Hey guys, have you ever caught yourself wondering what goes through someone's mind when they judge you purely by your cover? It's wild how quick people are to put labels on others. Picture this. A routine flight humming along from New York all the way to sunny Los Angeles. Up in first class, there's this super wealthy woman who practically oozes arrogance, and she makes it her personal mission to mock a completely innocent, down on his luck single dad. She takes one look at him and decides he doesn't even deserve to breathe the same pressurized air as her, sneering at his scuffed, worn-out clothes and battered old luggage, never once guessing in a million years that this quiet guy was secretly harboring a jaw-dropping secret. But then, out of nowhere, right in the middle of the flight, a terrifying mid-air emergency strikes, freezing the entire cabin in its tracks. When the captain's voice crackles over the intercom with a life-altering question, the whole dynamic flips upside down in a split second. Stick around with us all the way to the end of this journey to see how one incredibly humble father managed to completely flip the script and earn the deep, unshakable respect of every single soul on that aircraft. Oh, and hey, before we dive in, don't forget to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for a ton more inspiring stories. Now, let's get right into it. So, the rich woman had made herself entirely at home, sinking comfortably into her plush first-class seat as the New York to Los Angeles flight slowly loaded up. Decked out in thousands of dollars worth of high-end designer gear, she spent the whole boarding window glued to her phone screen, occasionally lifting her head just to shoot judgmental, snooty glances around the cabin like she owned the place. It didn't take long for her radar to lock onto her favorite target, a thoroughly exhausted-looking single father who was carefully guiding his young son down the cramped aisle. The poor guy had this faded, ancient duffel bag slung over one shoulder while simultaneously trying to help his little boy manage a miniature backpack that kept slipping off his tiny shoulders. Their clothes were neat and neatly pressed, sure, but they were unmistakably worn down from years and years of heavy use, telling a story of a tight budget and hard work. The father just kept a gentle, patient smile plastered across his face, guiding his boy safely back toward their seats tucked away in economy class. But as they squeezed past the boundary of first class, the wealthy woman wrinkled her delicate nose in pure, unfiltered disgust, speaking just loud enough so that everyone sitting nearby could catch every venomous word. She muttered under her breath that some people really ought to be riding a Greyhound bus instead of boarding an actual airplane. A couple of nearby travelers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging awkward side eyes, but nobody was brave enough to talk back or put her in her place. The dad definitely heard every single cutting remark, yet he didn't even break his stride, just keeping walking forward without throwing a single insult back. His little boy looked up at him, wide-eyed and totally confused by the harsh tone in that woman's voice. Bending down just a bit, the father flashed a warm, reassuring smile and gently told his son not to sweat it, whispering that everything was totally fine. Once they finally settled into their cramped economy row, the dad poured all his energy into making sure his kid was cozy and happy. He carefully clicked the seatbelt into place, wedged a tiny makeshift pillow right behind the boy's lower back to give him some support, and whipped out a little stash of homemade snacks he'd packed back home in a Ziploc bag. Their quiet little conversation was packed to the brim with genuine laughter and so much cozy warmth. The little guy was buzzing with excitement, talking a mile a minute about how he couldn't wait to catch his very first glimpse of the Pacific Ocean from up above, while his dad sat there listening intently to every single word, hanging on to his every syllable. Meanwhile, back up front, the wealthy woman just couldn't help herself. She kept dropping snide, judgmental comments to anyone who would listen. Every single time she had an excuse to walk past the economy section, she'd shoot the father and son this glaring look of absolute contempt, even going so far as to flag down a flight attendant to complain that some passengers looked totally unprofessional and terribly out of place. The flight attendant just offered a polite, practiced smile, completely ignored her rude whining, and went right back to her duties without missing a beat. Despite all the toxic negativity being hurled his way, the father stayed remarkably chill, keeping his focus laser locked entirely on his kid. His quiet dignity and endless patience stood out like a blazing beacon, making the woman's petty, ugly behavior look even worse by comparison. High above the billowing clouds, the aircraft cruised along smoothly, and most of the passengers eventually shook off the memory of that awkward little run-in. Little did a single soul on that plane know that just a couple of hours down the road, a totally unexpected crisis was brewing. One that was about to pull back the curtain on this quiet single father and leave the entire cabin utterly speechless. About 2 hours into the journey, the calm, relaxed vibe inside the cabin was violently shattered. A flight attendant came sprinting down the narrow aisle, her face twisted into an expression of sheer panic and worry. She was whispering urgently into the handset of the aircraft's internal comms system, and just a few agonizing moments later, the captain's voice boomed over the speakers. His voice, usually so steady and dripping with calm confidence, carried a heavy, undeniable edge of panic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we have an unexpected situation developing here that requires immediate, professional assistance. If there are any licensed pilots currently on board this aircraft, could you please identify yourselves to a member of the cabin crew right away?" That single announcement instantly nuked the mood of the entire flight. All chatter died out completely, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Passengers whipped their heads around, staring at each other with wide, terrified eyes, desperately wondering what on earth could have gone wrong. Even the wealthy woman, who had spent the majority of the trip looking down her nose at the single dad, snapped straight up in her seat, suddenly consumed by a wave of genuine fear. For a few agonizing seconds, nobody in the cabin even dared to breathe or move an inch. Then, right from the heart of the economy section, the single dad calmly and deliberately unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He looked down at his son, offering a tender, reassuring smile to calm his nerves, before reaching into his pocket and handing a small, official identification card to a nearby flight attendant who was rushing past. The moment her eyes scanned the badge, her jaw dropped and her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Within a split second, she gave a deeply respectful nod, stepped aside, and gently motioned him to follow her toward the cockpit. Instantly, a wave of urgent whispers rippled through the cabin like wildfire. The passengers were completely thunderstruck to discover that this quiet, unassuming father wasn't just some guy with a basic license. He was a heavily respected, elite former commercial captain and a decorated Air Force aviator with nerves of steel. The exact same man who had just moments ago been mocked, sneered at, and ridiculed for his simple, unflashy appearance happened to possess thousands of hours of high-stakes experience handling massive, complex aircraft in nightmare scenarios. Up in first class, the wealthy woman felt a scorching wave of embarrassment wash over her, her face turning bright red as she watched him disappear through the cockpit door. Every single cruel, vicious thing she had said came flooding back to haunt her, and she would have given anything in the world right then to magically take those ugly words back. Roughly an hour later, against all odds, the aircraft touched down on the tarmac with a smooth, textbook landing. As the passengers queued up to exit the plane, dozens of people stopped to personally thank the father for stepping up and saving the day, with several even breaking out into spontaneous applause. Shaken and humbled, the wealthy woman nervously approached him near the exit, stammering out an apology for judging him so harshly based purely on what he wore. The father accepted her apology with absolute grace, wearing a gentle, forgiving expression. Taking his little boy firmly by the hand, he smiled warmly down at her and said, "You never really know someone's true story just by looking at their cover." The woman stood there in total silence, frozen in her tracks as he walked off into the terminal. For the very first time all day, she finally grasped a lesson that carried infinitely more weight and value than all her wealth combined. True character isn't stamped on your clothes or your bank account. It's revealed entirely through your actions when it matters most.